Out of nowhere, our protagonist wakes up in complete darkness with one overwhelming feeling: hunger. Not the normal kind either. It's so intense that it completely takes over his mind. He tries to say he's hungry, but all that comes out is a strange little cry. Then something lands in front of him. It smells awful, but somehow he instantly knows it's meat. He doesn't stop to question what it is. He just devours every bite. It tastes unbelievably good, but somehow it still isn't enough. A moment later, something grabs him by the neck and lifts him into the air. Once his eyes adjust to the light, he realizes he's being carried through a huge forest by a goblin. A real one. Green skin, ugly face, bulky body, straight out of a fantasy game. The goblin glances at him once, and he immediately thinks he's about to die. Thankfully, it just keeps walking. Eventually, they reach a peaceful lake, where the goblin tosses him onto the shore and tells him in broken words to find food himself or he'll die. Then it leaves. He wonders if the meat from earlier was supposed to keep him alive, but decides that's a problem for later. First, he drinks from the lake to ease his hunger. While looking into the water, though, he notices an ugly green monster staring back at him. At first, he thinks it's another creature, until every movement matches his own. He checks his hands, touches his face, even pinches and twists it, hoping something will change. Nothing does. That's when reality finally hits. He's the monster. He can't believe it. He was supposed to be living a normal life and getting a job soon. Instead, he's somehow become a goblin. He laughs at how ridiculous it is, but that quickly turns into anger. He punches the ground, hoping he'll wake up, but everything feels real. Even trying to scream doesn't help. Only another beast-like growl comes out. Then the hunger comes back, again, even after eating. He fills himself with water until it's bearable, finds some shade under a tree, and falls asleep. When he wakes up, it's already night. His hand is still green, so no, this wasn't a dream. Then he looks up and freezes. There are 2 full moons in the sky. That's when he remembers all those isekai novels where people get sent to another world, except those guys become heroes, while he became a goblin. As ridiculous as it sounds, none of that matters right now because the hunger returns even stronger. He drinks more water, accepts that finding a way home can wait, and focuses on the only thing that matters: meat. While searching, he realizes he can see perfectly in the dark. One nice perk of being a monster, apparently. Soon he spots a rabbit, chases it down with surprising speed, corners it, strangles it, and tears into it with his fangs. As he finishes the meal, the unbearable hunger finally settles down. After that, he spends the whole night hunting just to keep the hunger under control. By morning, he's already eaten 2 rabbits, a frog, and a lizard. His old human self would have thrown up after a meal like that, but at this point, there's no denying it anymore. He's a monster. The more time passes, the more normal this new body starts to feel. It's also way stronger than a human's. He can see perfectly in the dark. His claws tear through prey with ease. His fangs can crush bones, and even dirty water doesn't make him sick. Honestly, this body is more useful than his old one. That doesn't mean he's happy about being a goblin, though. While thinking about what to do next, he remembers a story about a man who slowly lost his mind after turning into a tiger. He refuses to end up the same way. If this really is another world, then somehow he has to find a way back home. Then he remembers the goblin that dropped him off. It could actually speak, even if it was broken. If one goblin can talk, there are probably more of them. Maybe a goblin village knows something that can help him get back home. So he grabs a rabbit he caught before sunrise and heads back toward the goblin village. Halfway there, his instincts suddenly go into full panic mode. He dives into a bush and stays completely still. A massive spider, nearly the size of 2 grown men, walks through the forest. He was so terrified that every instinct in his body tells him to run. Then the spider jumps into another bush and drags out an orc. The orc desperately tries to escape, but the spider corners it, crushes it with one bite, and calmly eats the whole thing. Seeing that scene makes one thing painfully clear. Even as a monster, he's nowhere near the top of the food chain. Then, the second the spider is distracted, he quietly slips away and runs straight for the goblin den. When he arrives at the entrance, he calls out, and the same goblin who carried him comes outside. That's when he notices something surprising. After just one night, he's already grown enough that the height difference between them is much smaller. He offers the rabbit to the goblin. It takes the prey inside without a word, then comes back a moment later looking serious and simply says, "Come, enemy coming." Before he can react, the goblin grabs his arm and drags him into the cave without the slightest bit of care. It throws him into a room full of old weapons and clubs. Looking around, he realizes it's an armory, and the goblin clearly brought him there to pick a weapon. He looks through the armory, but every weapon is terrible. No legendary swords, no magic spears, just a club, a sharpened stake, and what looks like a farming fork. Since having something is better than nothing, he grabs the club. Then, the goblin immediately drags him out again, yelling at him to move faster and even shoving him along with its own club. Eventually, they arrive at what looks like an abandoned village, except it's packed with goblins. Standing in the middle is a much bigger red goblin wearing rusty armor with a chipped sword at its side. The goblin introduces him with a few broken words to the red goblin, and our protagonist quickly figures out the red goblin is the king. The king isn't impressed. Since he arrived last, it decides to punish him on the spot. This really annoys our protagonist because he came last, he is being punished, but before he can argue, he's forced onto the ground by the other goblins. And the king beats him over and over with a club, clearly enjoying it, then plants a foot on his head and reminds everyone who's in charge. Lying there, our protagonist is filled with so much hatred and anger that he makes himself one promise. One day, he'll kill this ugly bastard, and for the first time since arriving in this world, something other than hunger takes over, and it was pure hatred. Before anything else happens, an alarm suddenly goes up. Enemies are attacking. Someone kicks him aside while the king starts giving orders. 3 orcs come charging in, and despite being heavily outnumbered, they bulldoze through the goblins. They're almost twice the size, and every swing of their clubs sends goblins flying. The goblins keep attacking, but the orcs' thick skin shrug off most of the damage. The whole time, the Goblin King just stands back and throws more soldiers into the fight instead of joining it. Eventually, one wounded orc gets tired of that, charges straight at the king, and sends him flying with a single hit before the 3 wounded orcs escape into the forest. The king crashes to the ground completely motionless, and his chipped sword lands nearby. Seeing the opportunity, our wounded protagonist musters every strength he had and forces himself to his feet, grabs the sword, walks over to the unconscious king, and drives the blade straight through his neck. He expects to feel satisfied, but instead his entire body starts shaking. A wave of unbearable pain spreads through him, and it feels like something inside him is changing. When it finally ends, he notices every goblin is staring at him. He assumes they're about to kill him for murdering their king, but he's too weak to run anyway. Instead, one goblin steps forward, calls him king, and asks for his orders. Completely confused, he looks down at himself and realizes his skin isn't green anymore. It's turned red, and his body feels much tougher than before. Realizing this, he couldn't describe his emotion he felt at this time. But one thing is for sure, he isn't just happy about getting stronger or horrified that he looks even more monstrous. Whatever changed inside him leaves him feeling strangely intoxicated, and he can't shake the feeling at all. 10 days pass after he becomes the new Red Goblin King. During that time, the other goblins handle the hunting while he tries to figure out what actually happened to him. The only explanation that makes sense is something straight out of a game. He evolved. It sounds ridiculous, but nothing else fits. His speech has improved a lot since becoming what he calls a goblin rare, and the other goblins treat him completely differently now. The reason is simple: strength. In this world, the strong rule and the weak obey. Still, being called king when he's only leading about 20 goblins feels a little generous. He keeps wondering what triggered his evolution. Did killing the previous goblin rare make him evolve? Or was he already changing, and killing the king was just a coincidence? If stronger kills lead to stronger evolutions, then what happens if he kills an orc, or even that giant spider? The idea sounds crazy, but this whole world runs on fantasy logic anyway. Wanting answers, he asks one of the goblins if there are other kings. The goblin points out several different directions, meaning there are plenty of goblin rares in the forest. He also asks if there's anyone above them. The goblin quietly mentions a great king but doesn't seem to know anything beyond that. As he thinks about it, he realizes goblins are practically at the bottom of the food chain. Orcs overpower them easily, and that giant spider treats them like snacks. Every hunt is basically a gamble just to avoid starving. Right on cue, the hunting party returns with food. His stomach instantly reminds him it's hungry again. But when he looks at the goblins, he notices they're covered in injuries. Missing arms, missing ears, fresh wounds everywhere. When he asks what happened, they quietly admit the orcs stole their hunt again. He accepts the food, but something surprises him. Seeing the goblins hurt actually makes him angry. He still doesn't like them, but that doesn't stop him from deciding one thing. He's going to hunt the orcs. The urge for revenge feels strange, almost like this new body is affecting his mind, but he pushes that thought aside and starts planning instead. He already knows goblins are weaker, so charging in won't work. The old king tried winning with numbers, but numbers alone weren't enough. Humans beat stronger enemies with strategy, and that's exactly what he plans to do. The first step is gathering information. He orders the goblins to find the orcs, but if they're spotted, they must run. Keeping his forces alive is just as important as finding the enemy. While the goblins spread through the forest scouting, he heads out to prepare the weapons they'll need. 3 days later, the scouts return with good news. They've found an orc that always travels alone. After confirming it follows the same route every day, he tells them to stop watching it and gather food instead. This isn't just another hunt anymore. It's a war between one orc and 21 goblins. No one fights well on an empty stomach, so one group gathers food while everyone else starts digging. The plan is simple. Build a pit wide enough for an orc to fall into and deep enough that it can't climb back out. Digging turns out to be one thing goblins are actually good at, and by nightfall, the trap is finished. They carefully cover it up, hide every trace, and quietly return to the den to wait. The next day, the orc casually walks down its usual path like nothing in the forest could possibly threaten it. Hidden in the bushes, our protagonist waits for it to step into the trap. If everything works, the fight will be over before it even starts. But right before reaching the pit, the orc suddenly stops and sniffs the air. It knows something is wrong. Then it lets out a huge roar, and one terrified goblin panics, jumps out of hiding, and gives away the entire ambush. With the plan already ruined, he rushes out too and tells the rest of the goblins to stay hidden. He charges at the orc and swings the chipped longsword with everything he's got, but the blade barely does anything. The orc's hide is so tough it feels like hitting a tree. The orc slowly turns toward him, and the pressure alone almost freezes him in place. Every swing of its club is strong enough to crush him instantly. He barely dodges each attack while backing toward the hidden trap. Just a few more steps and everything will be over. Then he trips. Before he can recover, the club slams into his left shoulder and completely crushes it, making him scream in agony. The orc raises its weapon for the finishing blow, and with his body refusing to move, he thinks it's over. Then, out of nowhere, the same goblin that ruined the ambush comes back and stabs the orc from behind with a bamboo spear. The attack barely hurts it, but it gets the orc's attention. As the orc turns toward the goblin, our protagonist forces his broken body to move. Using every bit of strength he has left, he swings again with his right arm. This time, the sword slices clean through, cutting off the orc's arm. Now completely enraged, the orc charges straight at him, and this was exactly what he wanted. He takes a few steps back, and the moment the orc reaches him, the ground gives way beneath it. It crashes into the hidden pit, where bamboo spears and buried swords impale its legs and lower body. Trapped and unable to escape, it can only glare at him in rage. Then our protagonist walks up to the edge, raises his sword, and brings it down onto the orc's exposed head, killing it for good. The second the battle ends, the familiar pain returns. Another evolution begins. He endures it until the transformation finally finishes. When he looks at himself, his body has changed again. He now has 4 fingers instead of 3. His muscles are much bigger, his shattered shoulder is completely healed, and his red skin has turned into a dark, bluish-black color. Then he notices the goblin who saved his life has evolved too. It has now become a goblin rare and immediately kneels before him, calling him my king. The rest of the goblins come out of hiding and kneel as well. Watching them, he doesn't feel the satisfaction he expected. Instead, deep inside him, a small seed of ambition quietly begins to grow. A few days after killing the orc, he stops by a lake and catches his reflection. The scenery is beautiful, but every time he looks at himself, reality hits again. Sharp fangs, beast-like eyes, and a face that's become more intimidating than ugly. He's completely accepted that he's a monster now. The goblin rare who evolved alongside him calls him back, and they return to their settlement. Over the last few days, he's been teaching the goblins how to build simple pit traps, dig a deep hole, hide it, then finish off whatever falls in with spears. It's basic, but it works, and far fewer goblins are getting hurt. He's changed too. His body has evolved again, so he names this stage Goblin Noble. Compared to before, his hearing, eyesight, and strength have all improved dramatically. Now he can kill monsters that used to be impossible for him, even choking a triple boar to death with his bare hands, or taking down a giant 2-headed bird with his chipped sword. He also figures out something important about evolution. Even after killing an orc, he didn't become one. He stayed a goblin and simply evolved into a stronger version. That means he can only evolve within the goblin race. So now his goal is finding the next stage. Around that time, another idea starts growing in his mind. He wants to build a kingdom. To do that, he needs more goblins. Not just stronger ones, but a lot more of them. He calls over an older goblin and asks how goblins increase their numbers. The answer is exactly the kind of fantasy cliché he was hoping wasn't true. The older goblin explains that they originally came from a larger goblin village. That village still has female goblins, along with females from other races that were kidnapped and forced to give birth to more goblins. The previous goblin rare also banned weaker goblins from mating, which made many of them leave the village. Those runaways are the goblins now following him. When he asks about the village, he learns it's surprisingly close. It has around 50 goblin warriors plus older and younger goblins who can't fight. His own group has no females because they left hoping to find some on their own. With that information, he heads toward the village with 20 followers. He isn't interested in negotiating. First, he wants to see how strong the village is. The place looks like it originally belonged to humans. The houses are too big for goblins and broken fences are still standing. Hiding in the forest, he notices something strange. There are barely any adult goblins around and he can't spot another goblin rare. The females are nowhere to be seen either, so they're probably being kept inside. Then a hunting party returns through the south gate. Leading them is an armored goblin rare carrying a brand new longsword, followed by around 20 goblins and several wolf-like beasts. That's all the information he needs. He marches straight out of the forest with his own followers and heads through the front entrance. The village goblins immediately panic, but he ignores them and walks forward like he already owns the place. Stopping in front of the armored goblin rare, he asks if he is the king in a very cold and frightening voice. The pressure from his presence alone terrifies everyone. Some goblins collapse on the spot, while the goblin rare can barely stay standing. He gives the goblin two choices: hand over the village or die. The goblin rare doesn't even try to fight. It throws away its sword, kneels, and swears loyalty to him. He accepts the surrender, looks over the entire village, and announces that from this day forward, he is the king of this village. With that, he takes the very first step toward building his own kingdom. Later, while resting, he finally learns from an elderly goblin from that village on how to use something every goblin calls a status screen. By focusing inward in his mind, a game-like menu appears, showing his race, level, class, skills, and something called divine protection. That's when he realizes the so-called level up or evolution that he felt before was actually him going up a class level. Right now, he's a level 14 goblin noble. The screen also explains what each skill does. The skill, King of Group, slightly boosts his followers' abilities every time he levels up. Defiant Will helps him resist stronger enemies. Overpowering Howl can intimidate weaker creatures or force orders on his own goblins. Swordsmanship improves his sword skills, and Avarice lets him command more followers. Normally, goblins learn about these abilities shortly after birth, but since he grew up with a wandering group, nobody there knew how to awaken them. Looking back, he figures that he gains the skill Defiant Will probably during his fight with the orc, when he forced himself to move despite the overwhelming pressure. Swordsmanship likely came from constantly fighting with the chipped longsword, and he probably gained overpowering Howl when he made the other goblin rare surrender so easily. After understanding his own abilities, he starts asking the old goblin about the village. It turns out the reason it was so weak is because the nearby orcs had been bullying them for years. The goblin rare who surrendered wasn't even the original leader. The village had already gone through 3 different kings. Since none of the goblins have names, he decides to change that. He names the former king Gigu, and the goblin rare, who came to like spears and had recently evolved, becomes Giga. Apparently, giving a goblin a name is a huge honor, so both become extremely loyal to him. From then on, every goblin who evolves into goblin rare under him will receive a name. Next, he checks the village's supplies, and the situation is terrible. There's almost no stored food, and the equipment is just as bad. A rusty spear, some worn leather armor, a few farming tools, and that's about it. Most goblins fight with their bare hands, which explains why so many come back injured. He immediately starts reorganizing everything. Giga is put in charge of teaching everyone how to build and use traps, while the experienced hunters continue gathering food. Gigu receives a different mission. Scout the nearby orcs, count their numbers, learn where they hunt, and most importantly, come back alive. Looking over the village, he sees only about 20 goblins are capable of fighting. The rest are elders, young goblins, or too weak to help. He plans to train the younger ones later, but another problem catches his attention first. The population. The village has only 10 female goblins, which includes 3 young goblins and 7 capable fighters. There are also 3 human women who are being held prisoner. They're all young, and some are already pregnant. Seeing them fills him with anger. Even after becoming a monster, he can't ignore what's been done to them. He tries talking to them, but they don't even respond. Their spirits are completely broken, and they only wish for death. Then a horrifying thought crosses his mind. One of them might have been the woman who gave birth to him. Without saying another word, he draws his sword and gives them a quick, painless death. When the old goblin complains, a single glare shuts them up immediately. Afterward, he gathers wood around the shed, sets it on fire, and watches it burn to ashes. Even he isn't sure why he did it. He simply stands there until the flames die out. By the time his subordinates return with food, he quietly eats, lies down, and falls asleep. That night, another message appears before him. He has gained a new skill called Wandering Soul, although it hasn't awakened yet and will develop through future experiences. On top of that, he receives the blessing of the goddess of the underworld, Altizia, adding the attributes of death and darkness to his body. The next morning, he checks his status again. His new skill, Wandering Soul, is now listed, and he also sees the blessing of the goddess of the underworld, Altizia, along with the darkness and death attributes. Learning that the god of death personally chose to bless him doesn't exactly make him happy. He can't help wondering what kind of joke the gods are playing. Still, complaining won't change anything, so he asks the old goblin what divine protection actually does. The answer is simple. The gods choose it, and it's something that mortals have no control over. Also, their blessing determines what kind of magic they can use. So yes, magic is real. According to the old goblin's explanation, a class known as Druid appears to be able to use it, but there aren't any in the village. He also asks if anyone can tame beasts. The old goblin explains that right now, the goblins can only control 3 wild dogs, although stronger goblins could eventually tame tougher monsters. Our protagonist realizes that it's not much, but it's something. While Gigu is still scouting the orcs, Giga returns from a successful hunt with a double head, a rabbit, a snake, and some fruit. Seeing the good haul, our protagonist is really happy, and as a reward, he gives Giga the village's rusty iron spear, and the goblin is so grateful that he practically starts worshipping him. By evening, Gigu returns with even better news. There are only 5 orcs left. They split into 2 hunting groups, with 3 hunting at night and 2 during the day. Better yet, Gigu has memorized all of their patrol routes. Impressed, our protagonist rewards him with the best cut of meat and starts planning the attack. The next day, over 20 goblins head out for the ambush. Gigu and Giga split the forces while thick vine ropes are stretched across a wide road the orcs always use. The goblins hide in the bushes, and our protagonist waits alone in the middle of the path. When the 2 orcs arrive, he taunts them until they charge directly at him like brainless morons. Just then, at his signal, the hidden goblins yank the ropes, sending both orcs crashing to the ground. One doesn't even get back up before our protagonist smashes its head open with his sword. The second tries to stand, trips again, and loses both of its legs to our protagonist's next attack. Then he gives a single order: do it. The goblins swarm in with sharpened wooden spears, repeatedly stabbing the orc through its eyes, mouth, and open wounds until it finally dies. As a result, his level rose, but his class didn't change. He was hoping another goblin rare would come out, but unfortunately, that also didn't happen. Curious, they try eating the orc's meat and discover it's surprisingly delicious, so they take the rest back to feed the village. That night, they move against the remaining 3 orcs. Before the attack, he scatters the blood of the dead orcs across the road, creating a trail that lures the others straight into another ambush. It works perfectly. He kills the first orc himself, while the other 2 are handed over to his goblins. They stab the trapped monsters over and over until they're dead, with one even being eaten before it fully dies since the meat is too valuable to waste. By sunrise, every last orc has been wiped out. Afterward, they search the orcs' camp and recover a huge stash of stolen equipment, including armor, axes, clubs, longswords, and other weapons taken from human settlements. With the orcs gone, his village finally has food and equipment instead of constantly struggling to survive. Now his focus shifts to growing stronger. Goblins are still too weak to build the kingdom he wants, so he decides his next goal is creating 8 more goblin rares while continuing his own evolution. After all, he knows that a king who isn't strong enough to crush rebellion won't stay king for long. By the end of it all, he checks his status once more and realizes his level has jumped all the way from 14 to 32. After reaching level 32, he finally has some breathing room. With the nearby orcs gone, the village is no longer fighting just to survive. The forest has plenty of food, fresh water, and hunting grounds, but he knows ruling 50 goblins is nowhere near enough for the kingdom he wants to build. Before expanding, he needs to understand the world around him. There could be humans, dragons, or monsters, far stronger than anything he's seen. So, he reorganizes the tribe into 3 goblin hunting squads to improve teamwork, and only the best performing groups earn the right to mate with the female goblins. It's a harsh system, but it pushes everyone to get stronger. Even so, he still can't bring himself to care about the female goblins. Part of his human side refuses to accept this way of life, and he isn't sure whether holding on to that humanity is helping him or holding him back. With that, he leaves Gigu and Giga in charge of the village while he explores the forest himself. Armed with simple gear taken from the orcs that included a pelt armor, 2 long swords, and a dagger, he heads toward the lake, which was about half a day by foot from the village. While on the journey, he stayed alert for stronger monsters. Orcs aren't much of a threat anymore, but that giant spider is still out there, and there could be even worse creatures hiding in the forest. The monsters aren't his only concern. He still doesn't fully trust the goblins either. They obey him because he's strong, but if they ever sense weakness, that loyalty could disappear overnight. But what worries him even more is himself. Every hunt feels more exciting than the last. Violence is becoming easier, and his goblin instincts are slowly taking over. He refuses to let that happen. If he's going to rule monsters, it'll be by his own choice, not because his instincts force him to. While exploring, he spots a group of strange rabbits covered in natural armor. There are 6 of them, with one larger rabbit acting as the lookout. He tries to sneak closer, but one rabbit notices him at the last second. Then, the whole group scatters, so he switches targets and chases one of the smaller ones instead. One swing of his sword cleanly takes its head off. After the hunt, he tries biting through the rabbit's shell, but it's much tougher than expected, and his teeth almost shattered. So he uses his dagger to strip away the armor and eats the meat underneath. The meal was good, but it was so small that he's still hungry afterward. As he sits, he gets curious, so he examines the body and realizes the armor covers almost everything except the neck, and he immediately realized that his killing blow earlier wasn't skill after all. It was pure luck. That gives him an idea. If such a small creature has armor this tough, maybe the shells could be turned into equipment for his goblins. But the problem is that neither he nor the other goblins know how to make armor, so a thought comes to his mind that they'll eventually need a human craftsman for that. Rather than throwing the shell away, he keeps it. He punches a hole through it, threads a vine through the hide, and carries it on his back as he continues exploring. By the time the sun sets, he's collected 3 armored rabbit pelts along with the hide and fangs of a small flying reptile called a shape alligator. But when he returns to the village, he immediately realizes something is wrong. Everyone is panicking. The elder goblin quickly explains why. Humans have entered the forest. He immediately asks for details. There are 6 of them. 2 axemen, 2 swordsmen, a spearman, and 2 women. The news puts him on high alert. If they're searching for the human women the goblins kidnapped before he took over, then a fight is unavoidable. Even if they're not, letting them find the village would only bring a much larger army later. For a moment he considers abandoning the village, but escaping through the forest at night would be suicide with monsters like the giant spider roaming around. So he makes his decision. If these humans never make it home, his village will gain more time to grow, and by that time, even he himself would become much stronger. He orders Gigu to gather the warriors while Giga stays behind to defend the village. Then he leads 40 goblins into the forest. Thanks to his night vision, they quickly find the human group moving with torches. He has the goblins hide in the bushes with stones while he listens to their conversation. They're repeatedly calling out for someone named Finra. It turns out they're searching for a missing person rather than hunting goblins. He studies each of them. The 2 axemen don't look very experienced, while the male and female swordsmen clearly know how to fight. The real danger, though, is the friar and the young nun. They don't look physically impressive, but his instincts tell him they're the strongest people there. After examining them, he steps out onto the path and reveals himself. Then he uses his skill, overpowering howl, while asking why they've entered the forest. The The skill immediately affects the two axemen and the female swordsman, but the friar, the nun, and the male swordsman aren't affected at all. The humans instantly realize they're dealing with a high-ranking goblin that can speak. The nun tries suggesting they settle things peacefully, but the friar immediately shuts the idea down, insisting there's no point negotiating with a monster. Watching the exchange, he realizes the nun isn't leading the group. Rather, she's their weak point. The friar then sends the male swordsman Kaifin forward. The aura oozing out of the man was heavy, and he appeared to be a very experienced swordsman, and the man wielded a thick, massive blade that needed 2 hands to carry. The moment the fight begins, Kaifin closes the distance in an instant and slams his massive sword into the ground where our protagonist was standing just moments earlier, leaving behind a crater big enough for a goblin to fit inside. He throws his dagger, but it immediately gets shattered on impact, and for the first time our protagonist realizes just how terrifying a skilled human warrior can be. At the same time, the friar starts casting support magic on Kaifin, and a faint light covered the swordsman's body. Seeing this, our protagonist accepts that talking is over, and he just gives one command: do it. Hidden goblins immediately bombard the humans with fist-sized stones from both sides. The attack knocks both axemen unconscious and even injures the friar's leg. The female swordsman shields the nun, while Kaifin loses focus for just a split second. That's all the opening our protagonist needed. He immediately charges forward, grabs Kaifin by the face, and cuts him down before the friar can finish casting a protective barrier. The protective barrier appears too late, and Kaifin dies where he stands. Without slowing down, he turns his attention to the friar. The friar lets out a cry, "Lily, take Rashia with you, and run!" And he immediately launches a fireball spell. But our protagonist dodges it by dropping low and rushing forward like a beast. His sword tears through the friar's abdomen and out his back. Even while mortally wounded, the friar refuses to step aside and continues cursing him in the name of his god. But our protagonist just finishes the priest off with another strike. Before the friar dies, he deliberately whispers in his ears that he'll toy and kill the young woman the priest is trying so hard to protect. Horrified, the friar dies with that thought in his mind. He pulls his blood-covered sword free and flicks the blood away. It splashes across the female swordsman's face as she steps in front of the nun, trembling but still raising her weapon. Watching her, he can't help smiling. After the battle, he acquires Kaifin's massive steel greatsword. His level jumps from 32 to 43, and his swordsmanship skill improves from C- to C+. The female swordsman with red hair kept calling him a monster, but he didn't bother arguing. Instead, he called out to his goblins, who quickly surrounded the remaining humans. Seeing how badly they were outnumbered, the humans immediately became nervous. That's when he noticed the nun healing one of the unconscious axemen. She used a strange divine power that instantly stopped his bleeding. Watching her, he felt an overwhelming desire to have her, and before he knew it, he was on his knees. But something felt wrong. The emotion didn't belong to him. A strange presence was invading his mind and filling him with an unnatural longing. The pain became so intense that he felt like his head was about to explode. He realized that someone was trying to control his mind and angrily demanded to know who it was. That's when the nun introduced herself as Rashia Felzeal, a servant of the goddess of healing Zenobia. The moment he heard Zenobia's name, he knew that the goddess was behind the strange influence. Seeing him distracted, the red-haired female swordsman attacked. He easily blocked her strike and knocked her down, but instead of killing her, he cut his own knees to force himself back into control. His instincts told him to kill Rashia before she became a threat, while her companions urges her to run, but Rashia refused to abandon her companion. She healed the female swordsman again, and that only made him laugh. The idea of him being controlled or devoured by someone else was ridiculous. He had already decided to become a king. He would never bow to a human, a holy woman, or even a god, so he ordered his goblins to capture the humans alive without hurting them. Deep inside, he made another promise. He would surpass Rashia and become strong enough to resist anyone who tried to control his mind. If the gods wanted to interfere with him, then he would simply grow powerful enough to fight them. After the battle, his skill-defiant will evolved into insurgent will, and because of that, it could now protect him not only from the pressure of monsters, but also from the influence of higher races. Then, his connection with Altesia also weakened, making it easier for him to resist the underworld goddess's mental influence. His skill Wandering Soul also evolved into Distant Soul, which increased the loyalty of his subordinates and further weakened the god's influence over him. He also gained a new skill, a ruler's wisdom one, which strengthened his leadership abilities. This skill gave him another useful advantage. When fighting an opponent using the same type of weapon, declaring himself as the ruler would increase his physical strength and agility by 20%, while reducing the damage he received by 20%. Finally, he gained the skill Eyes of the Green Snake. As long as the enemy had fewer people than his own subordinates, he could see their weaknesses regardless of their level. After driving the humans away, the Goblin King returned to the village with 4 prisoners. Giga and the old goblin were relieved to see him alive, but the king used the moment to remind everyone of the huge difference in their strength. He carried the large steel sword taken from the human swordsman over his shoulder. He believed constantly showing his power would make rebellion less likely. Though with goblins, there was always a chance they would forget by tomorrow. The 4 prisoners were locked inside separate rooms, with the men and women kept apart and all their weapons taken away. Our protagonist wanted information from them, especially about humans, magic, and the gods. He was also interested in Reshia Felzeal. He wanted to understand her connection to Zenobia and how the goddess of healing was related to Altesia, the goddess of the underworld. Even though he had become a monster, he still found Reshia extremely beautiful. Her appearance only made his strange desire for her stronger, especially when he noticed the fear in her eyes. He knew that if he kept giving in to those feelings, he might eventually destroy himself. The prison itself was just an old animal shed reinforced to keep the prisoners inside. He warned the 2 women not to escape and promised not to hurt them as long as they stayed there. He also threatened that if they escaped, he would kill the men. If they killed themselves, he would kill the men anyway. The threat didn't scare the female swordsman much, but Reshia clearly understood that survival was now her responsibility. Before leaving, he reminded her that what she did to survive was her choice. After that, he announced to the goblins that the king himself will punish anyone who touched their captured humans. With that, he starts distributing the food and assigned guards to watch the village during the night before going to sleep. That night, a woman's voice echoed through his dream. She was blaming Zenobia for receiving their father's love while she had been left to suffer. Their father was Ativ, the ancestor god who created the earth. One daughter was loved, while the other was consumed by grief and jealousy. In the darkness, the woman wished she could take Zenobia's place. Then that cursed voice of that woman looked up from the depths of the darkness and strangled his neck. He woke up and immediately cursed the gods for filling his head with their nonsense. After shaking off the nightmare, one thought still remained in his mind. What if he could take the place of that woman? Later, he returned to the prison and was pleased to see that Reshia and the female swordsman hadn't escaped. That meant he could still get information from them. For now, though, food was more important. His 3-man hunting squads were still struggling to work together, which wasn't surprising since he had only recently forced them into groups. A few squads were already showing decent results, so he planned to keep working with them until they improved. There was also another reason he wanted to leave. He wanted to test the large steel sword he had taken from the human swordsman. So he headed toward the lake with Giga and the first 3 goblins. It was time to find out what that sword could really do. Part of our protagonist's plans was also to hunt the animals that came to the lake for water. While watching the area, Giga spotted a herd of Iral deer. These spear deer had huge, sharp horns and thick fur that made them difficult to injure. Even a single deer was stronger than an ordinary goblin and could probably match Giga. The king ordered the goblins to prepare their stones while he approached the herd alone. Giga stayed behind to watch the surroundings while the other goblins spread out and surrounded the deer. The herd noticed them but didn't seem worried. They probably thought they could escape whenever they wanted. That confidence disappeared when the king used overpowering howl and charged at them with his large steel sword. The deer ran straight toward the stone-throwing goblins, and seeing this, they quickly changed direction. But that small opening was enough for our protagonist to catch a young deer and cut through its neck in one strike. His next target was a fully grown buck. The buck turned around to protect the herd and charged at him, trying to block the steel sword with its huge horns. But our protagonist avoided its attacks and waited for an opening. When the deer jumped back, he closed the distance and crushed its leg with the sword before finishing it. He ordered the goblins to carry both the deer back to the village. Once they returned around noon, he started skinning one of them with his dagger. The pelt looked useful for making clothes, so he kept it. He gave the liver to the young goblins and kept the intestines for himself while the other goblins happily attacked the meat. Goblins and table manners clearly weren't close friends. Along with the 2 deer, they also had 3 triple boars, several rabbits, and some leaves for breakfast. With that, our protagonist roasted a rabbit over a fire and carried the cooked meat to the women's prison, telling them to eat. The female swordsman remained suspicious, while Rashia stayed cautious and refused to touch the food. He left the women alone and brought another rabbit to the two male prisoners. They were far more frightened of him and immediately started eating. Seeing this, our protagonist simply noted that those two were still too scared before returning to the women. Rashia finally asked why he was giving them food. The king explained that it was a deal. As long as she and her companions remained useful, he wouldn't kill or hurt them. Lily, the red-haired swordsman, angrily called him a lowly monster, so he reminded her that this so-called lowly monster was the one who defeated her. Lily turned beet red in anger, but Rashia stopped her from arguing further and asked our protagonist what he wanted them to do. He simply told them to give birth, causing Rashia to freeze in shock. He quickly admitted that he was joking. Then he explained what he really wanted. Rashia would handle healing, while Lily would help sew things for him. Lily protested that she was an adventurer, but he just points out that apparently this adventurer couldn't even sew. Rashia stopped her from arguing again, and Lily reluctantly agreed. And there is one more thing. He also wanted them to answer his questions whenever he needed information. Then, without showing any fear, Rashia asked him a question. What happened to the other two men he captured earlier whose name were Chinos and Mattis, and whether he knew a woman named Finra? He explained that the two men were receiving the same food and work as the others. If they proved useful, they would live. If not, they would die. As for the women who had been kidnapped by the goblins, they were already dead, and he didn't know whether one of them had been Finra. Rashia then asked for his name. The king admitted that he didn't have one and told her to simply call him King. Rashia accepted the answer without complaint and let him leave. Interestingly, his new skill insurgent will seemed to be working. He no longer felt the strange urge he had experienced around Rashia the previous day. Even if that was the only thing he learned, it was still useful information. Just before the day ended, another notification appeared. His level had increased from 43 to 45. At level 45, the Goblin King, which we now will call him as King, finally found the opponent he had been looking for. Deep in the forest, a giant spider stood before him with 8 legs and 8 dark red eyes. Unlike normal fights, this time he didn't want to use traps. He wanted to test his own strength against the strongest creature in the forest. Gigu and Giga watched from the bushes, ready to help if things went wrong, but King had chosen this fight for himself. He still wasn't strong enough to overcome Rashia's overwhelming power, and after losing to her influence twice, he needed a way to become stronger, so he decided to fight the giant spider head-on. He wanted to push his body to its limit and turn the battle into a bloodbath. There was no room for hesitation. He had to become strong enough to resist Rashia and the strange power connected to her. Then he activates overpowering howl, followed by his eyes of the green snake. The skill revealed the spider's weakness, its head. That was hardly a groundbreaking discovery, since a spider wasn't exactly hiding a secret second head somewhere. Before he could complain more, the giant spider suddenly launched itself at him like a spring. Venom shot from its mouth as it jumped over him, but he found an opening between its legs and rushed underneath. His large steel sword cut through one of its legs. The spider quickly recovered and attacked again. This time the king had no time to dodge, so he raised his sword to block the impact. The giant spider slammed into him and sent him flying into the ground, leaving him struggling to breathe. The spider immediately followed up with another attack. With no time to think, he decides to just trust his instincts and swung his sword blindly, and thanks to his swordsmanship C+, he managed to cut off another one of the spider's front legs. He followed with an upward strike, but the spider's sharp limb pierced straight through his shoulder. Even with the pain, he refused to release his sword. Instead, he tightened his grip and brought the heavy blade down with all its weight behind it. The strike damaged the spider badly and destroyed the limb stuck in his shoulder. The creature jumped away, leaving a huge crater where the sword landed. Green fluid poured from several of its eyes, and 3 of its legs had already been cut off. But the spider still refused to surrender. His shoulder continued bleeding, so he knew he couldn't drag the fight out. He rushed forward and swung his sword again, but his impatience caused him to lose control of the attack. The blade went too high and only scraped across the spider's body. The moment he realized he had missed, the spider closed the distance. It launched itself at him again, aiming its venomous fangs straight at his shoulders. Now he was trapped between 2 bad choices. If he stepped backward, the spider could knock him down and pin him. If he stayed where he was, he would have to face the attack head-on. Either way, things had just become extremely dangerous. At that moment, he decides to face the spider head on. He charged straight into its attack, but one of its fangs caught his arm, breaking it with a horrible crack. But he knows that there was no time to worry about the pain. He pulled his sword back and realized that at this distance, the spider couldn't move its legs properly. That gave him one chance. He would use the great sword to crush the spider's head. The great sword was designed for 2 hands, so he couldn't put enough power into it with one arm. The blade struck the spider's head but stopped at the surface. Refusing to give up, he pushed with his broken arm and forced the sword deeper into its skull. Green blood sprayed over him, but before he could finish the attack, the spider struck his stomach with one of its legs and sent him flying. He coughed up dark blue blood, but instead of staying down, he forced himself back onto his feet. His sword was still stuck inside the spider, leaving him completely unarmed. But by now, none of that mattered. He didn't care about his weapon, his injuries, or even the difference between their races. The only thing left was his will to survive and his instinct to kill the enemy in front of him. He roared and charged again with one arm hanging uselessly at his side. The wounded spider answered with a roar of its own and rushed toward him. Both of them moved at the same time, and for a moment, everything seemed to slow down. Then his skill, a ruler's wisdom 1, activates. The conditions had been met without him realizing it, filling his body with more power and making every step faster and stronger. The spider was still slightly faster, though, and both sides continued charging straight toward each other. The spider's leg aimed for his head while his fist targeted its head. At the last moment, he moved his head aside, pushing his agility to its limits, and mustered everything he could out of his muscles and barely avoided the attack. His body was already cold from blood loss, but he forced himself to take one more step. Then he roars loudly, gathered every bit of strength left in his body, and finally released his fist. His punch slammed into the spider's head with everything he had. The impact crushed through its skull and smashed its head into the ground. The death match was finally over. The spider could no longer move, while our protagonist could barely remain conscious. His vision blurred, and exhaustion took over his body. Still, he managed to whisper the only thing that mattered. "I won." Then he lost consciousness. As he lies there unconscious, a notification appeared. His level had skyrocketed from 45 all the way to 99. He had also gained a new skill called Dance at Death's Border. The closer he gets to death, the stronger his body becomes. When his health falls to 1/3, his physical strength and agility will increase by 20%. At 1/5, both his physical strength and agility increase by 30%. And when only 1/10 of his life remains, both his physical strength and agility will increase by a massive 40%. After reaching level 99, he suddenly found himself standing in a strange darkness. A gentle but unsettling voice called him boy and ordered him to wake up. When he opened his eyes, he found himself facing a beautiful woman surrounded by countless snakes. He quickly realized who she was. It was Altesia, the goddess of the underworld, and she proudly called herself his mother. Her presence was so powerful that he could barely resist the feeling of wanting to bow before her. Still, he forced himself to stay calm and refused to be controlled by her charm. Altesia admitted that she had been trying to influence his thoughts. She then asked whether he hated Zenobia because of her. The answer soon became obvious. Altesia was consumed by jealousy because their father, Ativ, the ancestor god who created the earth, had loved Zenobia while ignoring her. Her jealousy had driven her into madness and eventually into Hades. Now she wanted revenge. She ordered him to destroy Ativ's and Zenobia's world and everything that they hold dear. But our protagonist refused. Altesia was shocked that someone who had accepted her divine protection would dare disobey her. She surrounded him with snakes and threatened him with overwhelming divine power, but he still refused to bow. He declared that he would decide how he lived. He had already died once as a human, so he had no reason to cling to his old life or submit to anyone. If humans or gods stood in the way of his chosen path, he would destroy them himself. When Altesia asked what that path he wants to choose was, he proudly gave her his answer: conquest and domination. He wanted everything in heaven and earth to acknowledge him. He would trample over anything standing in his way and carve his name into history so that nobody could ever forget him. For a moment, Altesia was silent. Then she suddenly burst out laughing. She found his declaration hilarious, especially because he had proudly announced conquest and domination while standing in such a tiny goblin body. Still, she was pleased with him. His rebellion had proven that he truly possessed his own will instead of simply following her orders. Altesia then started teasing him like he was some amusing little child. She even grabbed his tongue after he secretly stuck it out at her. Then she joked about his appearance, saying he is very ugly, and gives him a proposal that if the shape of the soul yearns for it, she could remold him. But then she changed topic before he could answer, and eventually, she returned to the real reason she had brought him there. She decided to give him a gift. One of the snakes near her throne approached him. It was a small red snake with only one eye. He immediately refused, but Altesia ignored him and sent the snake straight into his body. The snake slipped past his arm, entered his chest, and merged with him. Naturally, he wasn't exactly thrilled about receiving a snake as a permanent roommate, but Altesia simply told him to take good care of it before saying goodbye. Then, the darkness swallowed everything, and he fell. When he opened his eyes again, he was back in the village. Giga was overjoyed that their chief had finally awakened, while Gigu ran off to inform everyone. But before the king could even recover, he noticed Reshia standing beside him with her hand on his forehead. Then he smelled blood. Something had happened while he was unconscious. Reshia explained that the village had been attacked and that more than half of his subordinates had either been injured or killed. The attackers were the orcs. Seeing Reshia's sad expression, our protagonist immediately asked about Lily, the red-haired female swordsman. Reshia explained that she had become a decoy so that she could escape. He then asked how much time had passed. Giga explained that it had only been since that morning and the goblins had been busy protecting the king's possessions. Hearing this, our protagonist understood that there was still time to act. He then told Giga that they would get their people back and asked how many soldiers could still fight. He learned that only 10 were available, and he knows that's enough. He then asked for Iron Second, his large steel sword. Giga pointed toward it, showing the weapon covered in blood. He picked it up and made his position clear. Anyone who touched his possessions would not be forgiven. Reshia offered to come with them. He initially refused, telling her that she would only get in the way, but Reshia reminded him that she was the one who had healed him, and her determination finally made him accept. He ordered Giga to protect her and bring any wounded soldiers to her for treatment. Then he gathered his remaining warriors and headed out. As they prepared to leave, another notification appeared. He has gained another skill called the Red Snake's Eye. Later, he also learns that 6 orcs had invaded, scattering his goblins, and only Gigu had stayed behind to protect him. Realizing he had become careless after defeating the nearby orcs, he knew he couldn't afford to let his guard down again. He returned toward the village with Gigu, while Gigu explained the whole situation to him. Currently, he had only Giga, 10 goblins, and Reshia with him. Since fighting all the orcs head-on would be reckless, he decided to separate them instead. Gigu would lead 4 goblins into the village and lure the orcs toward the hunting grounds, using the traps to slow them down. Our protagonist understands that the orc leader won't chase down Gigu's group, no. Instead, the ones weaker and dumber are the ones who'll be chasing Gigu's group. Therefore, victory should be attainable, provided they are able to split the orcs as planned. Then he ordered the remaining goblins to hide near the northern gate with stones, while he would take Giga and Reshia through the southern gate. The plan was simple: separate the orcs, then kill them one group at a time. Inside the village, our protagonist sees that there are only 3 orcs left, and he realized that Gigu successfully managed to draw the other 3 orcs toward them. All that's left now is to focus on these 3 remaining orcs. One of them immediately caught his attention because the orc carried a long spear and wore a necklace made from fangs. He tries to activate the skill the Red Snake's Eye, and it actually works, revealing that the orc was level 67, a leader and horde chief, with no divine protection. This made him realize the conversation he had with the goddess wasn't a dream. The skill allowed him to see the status of enemies whose level was lower than his own. That made things much easier. The only problem was that the skill depended on level, meaning it could become useless after he evolved into a higher class. Luckily, he was still level 99 and didn't evolve, so it worked perfectly. There were 3 orcs in total. 2 seemed ordinary, while the spear-wielding leader was the real threat. Our protagonist then sent Giga and Reshia toward the northern gate, while he approached the orcs from behind. He chose the southern route because the orcs' strong sense of smell made it harder to approach from other directions. As he got closer, he spotted the bodies of his dead goblins and the fallen female swordsman Lily. His anger immediately returned. Before the orcs could react, he rushed in and crushed one of the followers with a great sword. He then immediately attacks the leader, but the orc used its long spear to keep him away. The weapon had roughly twice the reach of his great sword, so our protagonist decides to close the distance and attack from close range. The moment that spear swung past him, he lowered himself and charged like a beast, aiming for the leader's head. But the orc was waiting for him. An unexpected attack struck his leg, followed by another spear strike aimed at his head. Somehow, he barely rolled away and escaped. Realizing he couldn't weaken them any further, he retreated toward the northern gate, dragging the enraged orcs after him. Beyond the northern gate was a narrow road leading toward the mountains. The forest had swallowed most of the old path, leaving the area packed with trees and difficult to move through. He specifically had chosen this place because he expected the narrow space to make the orc leader's long spear harder to use. Unfortunately, the orc leader had another idea. It raised the spear and started spinning it, using the force of the movement to turn the weapon into a deadly storm. The spear easily cut through the surrounding trees, and our protagonist realized he couldn't approach carelessly. If he wanted to attack, he would have to find the right opening. But his hesitation created an opening for the other orc instead. The other orc immediately noticed and attacked with its long sword, while the leader orc kept its spear aimed at him. Together, they controlled his movements and forced him to fight according to their rhythm. Our protagonist became increasingly impatient. Small wounds began piling up, and blood continued to flow. His strength was slowly disappearing. He dodged another sword strike from the follower, but the spear immediately came afterward and smashed into him, sending him flying. As he hit the ground, he saw the other orc raising its sword with a grin, ready to finish him. Giga could barely watch his king getting overwhelmed by the orcs, but he had been ordered to protect the human woman, so he stayed behind. Still, he couldn't understand why his chief always fought alone and refused to put his subordinates in danger. Back when Giga was just an ordinary goblin, his old leader followed the usual rule that power was everything. The leader kept the females for himself, while the stronger goblins took the best food. Giga accepted it because that was simply how goblin hordes worked. Eventually, another goblin decided to leave, and Giga followed him along with several young goblins. They followed him since it seems like he'll allocate the females and food as well. They eventually found a place to settle, but 3 orcs attacked them. The new leader said he would drive those orcs away, and so he gathered the 30 goblins that were with him and he told them to surround the 3 orcs. But their attempt to surround the orcs failed. Giga was knocked unconscious, and when he woke up, their leader had been replaced by a red goblin, which turns out to be our protagonist. Giga followed this new chief mostly because there wasn't much choice, but his opinion quickly changed when the chief taught them how to use traps for hunting. For the first time, Giga saw a leader who shared food, didn't keep all the females for himself, and even gave his goblins names. More importantly, the chief once saved Giga when the orc's terrifying roar left him helpless. After evolving into a rare goblin, Giga finally understood what his chief really was to him, a king. So he swore his complete loyalty, and now that king was in danger. Giga couldn't just stand there anymore. He told Rashia to hide, then rushed out to save his king. A strange fire filled his body, giving him the strength to risk everything, and he charged at the other orc with his rusty spear. The attack pierced the orc, but both of them crashed to the ground. Seeing this, the king immediately moved to help him. The orc leader came after him with its long spear, forcing him to block the attack with his great sword. He quickly realized just how strong this orc was, and he understands that he has a better chance of winning than Giga, who is fighting the other orc behind him, so he doesn't have the luxury to have the other goblins support him. So he ordered the other goblins to support Giga by throwing stones. Since Giga was already fighting another orc, he had to handle the leader himself. As the final fight begins, his swordsmanship skill allowed him to parry the spear attacks, and he slowly pushed closer, trying to get inside the weapon's range. He was almost there when the spear handle smashed into his feet. His bones broke, and the next attack by the orc sent him flying into the thickets. From there, he lost sight of the fight. That was when the orc leader suddenly went after Giga. The follower cut into Giga's arm, then the leader smashed his spear into him and sent both Giga and his weapon flying. Giga collapsed, his arms twisted and blood coming from his mouth. Seeing this, pushed our protagonist past his limit. He immediately charged towards the orcs with overpowering howl, even recklessly stepping into the follower's sword range. Instead of dodging, he moved closer and deliberately took the sword through his shoulder. With the blade stuck inside him, he grabbed it with his bare hand. Then his skill dance at death's border activated, increasing his physical strength and agility by 20%. Still, not enough. He pushed the sword deeper into his own wound, triggering the second stage and raising those boosts to 30%. Then he lifted his two-handed greatsword with one hand and brought it down on the orc. The blow smashed through its head and cut deep into its chest before he kicked the dying orc away. Seeing this, the orc leader enraged voice bellowed, and with it came lunging his long spear. The spear crushed the left arm that held the orc follower's longsword, triggering the third stage of the skill dance at death's border and increasing his strength and agility by 40%. Despite his injuries, he stepped forward and swung his great sword. The blow knocked the orc leader's spear away, winning a contest of raw strength that should have been impossible. The orc was in disbelief while our protagonist held the great sword above his head, and in one straight line he brought it down. The orc desperately tried to survive by crossing its arms and rushing closer, hoping to reduce the damage from the one-handed sword. It was a smart move, but it wasn't enough. Our protagonist's right arm suddenly swelled with abnormal strength as he brought the sword down. The blade crushed through the orc's defenses and smashed its head. With both orcs finally defeated, he called for Rashia and helped Giga back to his feet. He brought Giga to her and ordered her to heal him first, even though he was badly injured himself. Rashia questioned why he was prioritizing Giga, but he insisted that Giga came first. As she began healing him, his knees finally gave out. Something inside his body was changing. A strange sensation spread from his stomach through his entire body, as if his body was being rebuilt from within. Steam began pouring from him, and just before his eyes closed, he remembered the Mother Goddess's words about, "The shape of one's appearance is the shape of one's soul." Then the system announced that he had broken through level 100. His noble class evolved into Duke class while still remaining the Horde Chief, and now his current level reset back to 1. His evolution into a Goblin Duke also increased his abilities. His skill Swordsmanship C+ will increase to B-, and his skilled Avarice will transform to Insatiable Greed. Since he also defeated the Orc leader, his level immediately rose from 1 to level 10. Even the one-eyed red snake granted to him by Altesia, the goddess of the underworld, transformed inside his body. He also gained a new skill magic manipulation along with some items which included a long spear, long sword, and fang necklace. After evolving into a Goblin Duke, he crossed the lake and caught sight of his new reflection. He now had tawny skin, a human-sized body, a single horn, black fur running down his back, and 5 fingers again. A red snake pattern also wrapped around his arm. Even his face had changed from being outright ugly to something much more dull and expressionless. He couldn't help wondering if this was really still a goblin. Still, since his goblin subordinates had become even more obedient, he decided not to worry about it too much. He also realized his sense of shame was slowly returning. Lily had started making loincloths for him, and after spending more time around humans, being naked all the time was starting to feel uncomfortable. After driving away the orc leader, he went to the hunting grounds to help Gigu with his hunting job. His great sword, also called as the Iron Second, felt surprisingly light now after he evolved, so he decided to test out his new strength. He managed to find some good targets to test his body. It turns out to be another orcs that fell into one of the traps they set in the hunting ground. A single swing was enough to tear through them and crush their bones. Satisfied with the results, he stopped testing. Turns out Lily had also survived the attack, although she had been knocked unconscious and was now being kept in custody. He then used overpowering howl to gather the surviving goblins. Amongst the gathered goblins are Giga, who had recently recovered. Gigu was still injured, but he was obediently present there, and the rest of the horde gathered as well. Their numbers had dropped badly. The original 50 goblins were now down to 40, with only around 30 still able to fight. 7 were too injured to move, and the number of goblins capable of hunting had fallen even further. The orc attack had clearly taken a heavy toll. 6 female goblins were still preparing materials, but the only female who had become pregnant was also killed during the attack. Since she probably couldn't escape, she had been caught by the orcs. To prevent this from happening again, he decided the goblins needed to learn how to escape before things got that bad. The human captives were all safe. Ironically, the goblins had prioritized protecting his human treasures over protecting their own females. The captives were also behaving much better now. Lily had changed the most. She used to constantly snarl at him, but now she was almost suspiciously obedient. Rashia, meanwhile, had become the troublesome one. After seeing his level increase, she started bombarding him with questions whenever she saw him. He was starting to worry that talking with her too much might get him caught up in her charm, although his skill helped keep that under control. He had even asked Rashia whether she was afraid of him. She simply shook her head because after everything he had done to protect her and the others, she didn't believe he would hurt them. For now, there wasn't much else he could do. He was still too weak to enter human territory, so he decided to keep increasing his strength. He then checked the new skills he had gained. He noticed that his skill Insatiable Greed has become more stronger. Thanks to this skill, he can now greatly increase the number of subordinates he could command, while also greatly increasing his charm toward members of his own race. That could be useful, but since he had no interest in female goblins, he realized the skill could also become a huge problem if he wasn't careful. His swordsmanship also increased its rank to B-, and he thinks that it's most likely due to having 5 fingers. Thanks to that, his movements were now much more precise, letting him knock an enemy down and immediately switch into a sword attack. His final new skill, Magic Manipulation, allowed him to manipulate magic according to his attributes. Since magic was one of the most interesting parts of living in another world, he decided to learn how to use it. He didn't want to meet Rashia, so he first asked the old goblin to teach him, hoping its age meant it knew something useful. Unfortunately, the old goblin couldn't help much. So, despite not wanting to deal with Rashia, he had no choice but to ask her. When he told her to teach him magic, Rashia looked completely shocked. She explained that magic came from a contract with the gods and could be invoked through an area and an image. But our protagonist quickly cut through the complicated explanation and asked how to actually use it. Rashia finally explained that he just needed an image in his mind and words that matched what he wanted. Thinking about the fireball and barrier he'd seen before, he tried it himself. Then he chants, "Let my body be inviolable." Darkness immediately wrapped around his body and formed armor around him. It covered him completely and could protect him from enemy attacks. He was surprised that it actually worked. Rashia and Lily were even more shocked. Rashia couldn't understand how he had managed to use magic so easily, but our protagonist just ignored her questions and instead asked how to cancel the spell. She told him to use an area of cancellation with whatever wording he wanted. He simply said, "Release," and the dark armor disappeared. Satisfied with his new power, he planned to experiment with magic from now on. But before he could start, Rashia suddenly tells him that she wants something from him and asked whether this was against their contract. After all, they agreed that she was only supposed to heal and talk with him. Knowing this, our protagonist still decides to hear what she wanted, and then she revealed that she actually wanted to bathe. He was caught completely off guard, so he called Ji-ga over and ordered him to escort her. Just then, the system announced that his level had increased from 10 to 11 while the buff was cancelled. Later, he decides to test his new magic by enchanting his sword. With the words, "Turn me into a blade," the darkness covering his body flowed into the iron second and wrapped around the blade. He then hid in the thickets of the forest and waited for his prey. His target was a herd of aral deer, which his goblins had discovered while searching for food. There were around 30 deer near the lake, but he picked the biggest one as his target, and now they were all about to become practice targets for his new power. The moment he stepped out, the deer noticed him and immediately ran. He had already prepared to sprint though, so he quickly caught up to his target. Just as he was about to attack, the deer suddenly changed direction. The sharp turn put a lot of strain on his body because he was running at full speed, but he endured it and kept chasing. Once the deer entered his range, he swung the enchanted iron second. The attack cut it down instantly, and the deer didn't even have time to make a sound. He was honestly impressed. The resistance was so small that cutting through the deer felt like slicing butter with a knife. While he was testing the magic, he noticed that his goblins had already become pretty efficient at hunting aral deer. Their 3-man hunting teams were working well. The young goblins were placed into experienced teams once they grew up, where they learned how to use traps. This allowed them to catch prey without damaging the meat. That improved their hunting efficiency and gave the goblins more food. More food meant higher survival rates for newborn goblins, which would eventually increase the horde's fighting strength. Still, he didn't need such a complicated reason to care about food. He simply wanted his goblins to stay full. Nobody could fight properly on an empty stomach. Since their main source of food was meat, he wanted them to gather as much as possible. Their biggest problem was preservation, with smoking being pretty much the best method they had. While he was thinking about all of this, he suddenly heard a deer cry out. When he looked over, he saw one of the goblins sitting beside a dead deer with steam-like vapor coming from its body. He immediately realized what was happening. The goblin was evolving. The goblin's skin slowly became thicker, its muscles grew larger, and its expression became more fierce. When the transformation finished, its cry had changed into that of a goblin rare. This was the first time he'd ever seen someone evolve, so he watched closely. Then, a status window suddenly appeared in his mind. The goblin was a level 1 goblin rare with skills including tracking, throw projectile, axe mastery D+, omnivorous, enraged voice, a monster's feelings, and beast tamer. It had no divine protection and no attributes. He quickly realized that his skill Red Snake's Eye had activated, that's why he could see the status. More importantly, the skill wasn't limited to enemies. It could also examine his allies. He felt a little stupid for never testing that possibility before. Still, he considered stopping the hunt to immediately investigate the newly evolved goblin and the others. But his own level was only 11, and Red Snake's Eye had certain level restrictions, so he decided not to rush things. For now, food came first. He would continue the hunt and deal with everything else afterward. One of the goblins then called out to him, reminding him that someone had successfully evolved. Since the goblin needed a name, he decided to call him Gigi. Gigi immediately bowed several times after receiving his name, almost as if he'd been given something sacred. Our protagonist then checked his skills and noticed one that stood out. It was Beast Tamer. As an ordinary goblin, Gigi could only control a few dogs, but after becoming a goblin rare, his ability should have improved. He was curious to see how much that skill could eventually contribute to the horde's fighting strength. After that, the hunt continued. By the end of the day, they had caught 2 Irel deer and 3 armor rabbits before returning to the village. Once they arrived, he ordered the goblins to sit down in an organized manner. It was time to interview them and figure out their natural talents. He wanted to identify skills that could improve their fighting potential. Once he found something useful, he planned to train that goblin by making them use the skill repeatedly. Unfortunately, his skill Red Snake's Eye couldn't examine more than half of the goblins. Among those he could inspect, only 2 had skills that might actually help their fighting force, excluding Gigi. The number was disappointing, but there was no reason to expect perfect results immediately. For now, he decided to focus on raising his own level. Once he became strong enough to examine the remaining goblins, he could search for their talents too. Any useful skill would then be trained during every hunt. He also couldn't inspect the other goblin rares, including Gigu and Giga. He was curious about their statuses, but there was nothing he could do about that yet. So instead of worrying about what he couldn't obtain, he decided to make the best use of what he already had. Talking with Rashia had also become part of his daily routine. He had slowly earned enough of her trust to get useful information from her. Ironically, the orc attack had actually improved his situation. The orcs had helped him evolve, provided food for his subordinates, and even helped him get the information he needed from Rashia. He hated admitting it, but that was the truth. Even if the attack had caused heavy losses, he had to make use of what remained. If he failed to use what they had gained from those deaths, then the goblins who died would have died for nothing, and he couldn't allow that. But as he thought about his dead subordinates as pieces on a chessboard, he suddenly questioned himself. They were monsters, yet he still felt sympathy for them. He knew that careless sympathy could eventually lead to destruction. Before he could think any further, Rashia's voice pulled him back. She was annoyed because he hadn't been listening. To get her to continue, he offered to let her bathe once every 2 days. Rashia immediately accepted. She then asked if Chinos and Mattis could bathe too. After thinking about it, he agreed, but changed the schedule and promised to provide escorts. With that settled, they returned to their conversation. What he really wanted from Rashia was information about the human world. He asked about nearby settlements, their populations, soldiers, countries, literature, overall strength, relationships with other nations, and what they knew about the forest. He listened to her explanations every day, although he never blindly trusted everything she told him. Eventually, he decided that for the first time, he will leave the hunting grounds to Gigu and the other goblin rares, while he would explore the forest alone. It had already been 10 days since he captured Rashia, so there was a chance the humans had started searching for her. Exploring unknown parts of the forest would let him discover new areas, while also raising his level. Basically, he could accomplish 2 things at once. Still, going alone was dangerous. Even after becoming a goblin duke, his overall physical ability was only comparable to a giant spider. His advantages were his intelligence, skills, and magic, but he wasn't sure whether those were enough to overcome a powerful human. Someone might possess a skill capable of killing him instantly, which wouldn't even give his skill Dance at Death's Border a chance to activate. There could also be some powerful weapon he'd never encountered before. If something like that existed, even his skill, a ruler's wisdom one, might not be enough to save him. Despite those risks, he continued deeper into the forest. The tension running through his body kept increasing, but he refused to stop. Then he encountered 3 orcs. The moment he saw them, his fear mixed with excitement. He immediately enchanted his sword again and prepared for battle. The orcs noticed him and started moving toward him. At the same time, something inside him began to tremble with excitement. Then a roar burst from deep within his body. He stared at the powerful enemies ahead and stepped forward. Because his attributes were darkness and death, the magic he used was black magic. But black magic came with a serious drawback. Using it would affect his mind. Then with that, a new skill was acquired called Soul of a Crazed Warrior. And because of that skill, he would slowly begin to lose his sanity. Then his skill activates, and his vision suddenly turned red. The approaching spear was easy to dodge, and in the next instant, he closed the distance and drove Iron Second straight through the orc's stomach. The orc screamed, but he didn't stop. With the sword still buried inside it, he swung upward and tore through its body, covering the area in blood. For some reason, seeing the terrified orcs made him genuinely excited. His bloodlust completely took over, and he chased down the fleeing orcs one after another. When one turned its back, he brought his sword down and ripped open its back before crushing its head beneath his foot. The last one didn't fare any better. He cut off its leg, destroyed its shoulder, then grabbed its head and crushed it with his bare hand. By the time it was over, the ground was covered in blood and corpses. He had basically slaughtered every orc in sight while following the violent impulse inside him. Thankfully, his other skill, Insurgent Will, activates and reduces the effect on his mind. His senses finally returned, and he realized exactly what he had done. Looking around at the aftermath, even he thought it was far too much. Gaining a little extra power had apparently come with a serious loss of self-control. With that, he decides to clean himself up, so he used his improved hearing to find water. Eventually, he discovered a waterfall and entered the lake beneath it to cool his head and wash away the blood and smell of orc flesh. Once he was clean, he returned to the battlefield. The sight still bothered him, but since the corpses were already there, he decided to make use of them. He gathered the bodies together to attract scavengers, then hid nearby and waited. Several hours passed, and he started wondering if wasting his time in the bushes had been a terrible idea. Fortunately, something finally showed up. The creature had brown fur, a tail, and a beast-like face. It walked on 2 legs, carried a fang, and was even smaller than a goblin. There were 5 of them. They were kobolds. Creatures supposedly weaker than goblins, but still intelligent enough to understand things. He immediately rushed out and caught one. The others scattered, leaving him alone with the captured kobold. "Can you talk?" he asked, but the creature only bared its fangs. Maybe these things weren't as intelligent as he had expected. He tried giving it some orc meat. The kobold simply ate it, so he eventually dropped it and continued searching. But after walking for a while, he noticed the same kobold was still following him. The creature kept begging for more food while looking between him and the orc corpses. Seeing how hungry it was, he tossed another piece of meat toward it. The kobold chased after the meat, ate it, and then came right back. He tried waving it away, but somehow the creature misunderstood and just nodded while stuffing its cheeks. Since he wanted to attract more kobolds, he stayed near the corpses until nightfall. Eventually, he decided it was time to head back to the village. But while walking through the forest, he heard footsteps behind him again. When he turned around, there was the same kobold. He asked why it was following him, but the creature only tilted its head. Then it finally starts talking with small words by pointing at him and said he was strong, before pointing at itself and asking our protagonist to take it along. He was already tired of dealing with it, so he ignored the request and continued toward the village. The goblins and villagers noticed the kobold following behind him, but thankfully, nobody asked about it. Rashia was the only exception. She immediately pointed out that he had brought something interesting with him. The kobold was sitting at his feet and happily wagging its tail, while Rashia looked oddly dissatisfied as she wants a pet too. Our protagonist, however, didn't feel like explaining anything, so he simply brushed it off. Instead, he asked where kobolds ranked among her people, which led into their usual discussion. Rashia considered him and the other monsters part of the same general group, but she still distinguished them from the monsters who had captured her and the other humans. That became the main topic, and they continued talking for nearly an hour. Throughout the entire conversation, the kobold was stretched across his feet like it already owned the place. He could only look down at it and think one thing: "Bastard, you actually plan on staying?" Then his status window opened and informed him that the kobold has been subordinated. His level has risen from 11 to 12. As time passes, he adopted the kobold because of its intelligence, thinking that it was supposed to become part of his main force, but somehow it had turned into nothing more than a pet. It was sitting at his feet, cleaning itself with its tongue, then yawning and scratching its face with a fang. At this point, he could only wonder if it was some kind of old man. After exploring almost every direction around the village, he had a pretty good idea of the surrounding area. The kobolds lived to the east, spear deer were to the north, and the lake sat between them. The triple head and triple boar lived to the south. The west was the only real problem. He learned from Rashia that the humans called the deeper forest the forest of darkness, and most of the orcs had been coming from that direction. Orcs usually traveled in groups of 3 to 8. They had no permanent homes, so they would settle somewhere, eat everything they could find, then move on. Basically, they were like grasshoppers constantly jumping from one place to another. The important part was figuring out why they kept coming from the west. According to Rashia, monsters supposedly became stronger the deeper someone went into the forest, so now there were 2 possibilities. Either something powerful was driving the orcs away, or there were a lot of orc villages deeper inside. Either way, the threat was coming from the west. So he consulted the elder goblin and asked about joining forces with other goblin villages. Right now, his own forces consisted of 3 goblin rares, 32 fighting goblins, and 9 that couldn't fight. Not exactly an impressive army. That reminded him of something else. There was no single goblin king ruling everyone. Instead, there were 4 main groups. If each had around 30 goblins, bringing them together could give him roughly 120. That sounded like a decent army. So he asked the elder goblin for information about similar villages and their chiefs. The old goblin warned him not to rush. They didn't even control the east yet. That was a problem because he couldn't afford to ignore the humans either. He didn't know when they would come looking for Rashia, or how important she and the other humans were to them. But waiting forever wasn't an option either, so he decided to prepare for the worst in case the humans ever come. He told the kobold to warn him if humans entered the forest. The kobold barked happily, accepted some meat, and immediately ran off. Whether he could actually trust the thing was another question, but it was better than nothing. To be safe, he also spread goblins around the area as lookouts. With the eastern side covered, he could finally focus on the other goblin villages. After some pressure, the elder goblin gave him the information he wanted. Their village was apparently one of the smallest and had survived mostly through luck. The closest goblin village had around 30 fighters and was about a day's walk away. They lived inside a sturdy cave, and their chief was only a goblin rare. The information wasn't completely reliable since it came from the elder's memories. Apparently, his father had once been a goblin rare and had served as this village's chief 3 generations ago. Still, it was enough. With no stronger group dominating the area, this village looked like a reasonable first target. He orders Gigi to prepare everything, and they are taking 10 goblins. Giga will defend the village while they are gone. He also ordered the elder goblin to guide them. After a little hesitation and a threat, the old goblin agreed, and they began preparing their supplies. The problem was the preserved meat. He put some raw meat into a shed and tried smoking it with the limited knowledge he had. The result was completely burned meat. Just when he was wondering where he had messed up, Rashia showed up and asked what he was doing. He explained that he wanted to make preserved meat for their upcoming attack. Instead of being bothered by that, Rashia suggested adding fruit to their meals. She specifically wanted keju, a red fruit that apparently looked somewhat like an apple. He agreed to start serving it at lunch. The goblins could eat leaves, roots, and fruit, but they still preferred meat, so they didn't normally gather much keju unless he ordered them to. Then Rashia called Chinos over and asked him to teach the goblins how to smoke the meat properly. Chinos explained the process, and this time it worked perfectly. The secret was simply controlling the strength of the fire. He wondered if Chinos' skill had something to do with it, but he didn't investigate. Instead, he rewarded him with some rabbit meat. The bigger problem was whether ordinary goblins could reproduce the process. The goblin rares probably could, but using valuable fighters just to smoke meat wasn't worth it. And since humans already knew how to do it, he figured they could handle that work instead. Then Rashia reminded him not to forget his promise. That made him stop and think, because Rashia spoke to him as soon as he finished thinking. But he thought, there's no way, right? But he still finds it odd because she had somehow turned a simple request for better food into a situation where the humans themselves could become indispensable for his plans. For the first time, he felt something different from her. This wasn't just a girl asking for food. It felt more like the wisdom of a saint. He couldn't help wondering how much of Rashia was actually Rashia, and how much was the saint. Then another question came to him. How much of him was still human, and how much had already become a monster? The desire to find out grew stronger, and whether it was because of Rashia's charm or something else, he couldn't resist it. Then a notification pops up. The believer of the healing goddess Zenobia had manifested her skill charm of a saint. Because of this skill, his mind would now be slightly affected, making it difficult for him to harm the saint. Later, after walking west for about a day, they finally reached the Goblin village. The entrance looked tiny, almost like a crack in a massive rock, but the cave itself was surprisingly spacious. A large group of goblins were hanging out around the entrance, but our protagonist didn't expect them to attack. Since the passage was too narrow for him to enter, he sent Gigu and Gigi inside to call their chief out. He also sent 8 more goblins with them while the remaining 2 patrolled and hunt some preys while they are waiting for the others to return. Our protagonist knows that there wasn't much reason to worry anyway. Ji-ga had a skill that allowed him to bring the triple boar along, and inside a narrow cave, avoiding a charging triple boar would be nearly impossible. After waiting for a while, he heard voices from inside. Soon, Gigu and Gigi returned with a goblin rare. The goblin was covered in scars, some old and some still fresh. Even while being forced to kneel, it looked straight at him without backing down. The old goblin explained that this chief was a good goblin who had been known to their group for generations. He was gentle, loyal, and apparently exceptional among goblins. That changed his mind. Instead of killing the chief, he offered it a chance to become his subordinate. The goblin rare agreed, but only if he promised to save all the goblins under its command. Our protagonist accepted immediately. Looking at the starving goblins, he realized just how badly they were struggling. So he offered them food and brought out the smoked meat they had prepared, along with the prey they had hunted along the way. Then he offered something even more valuable to a goblin, a name. He named the goblin Rare Gigo and ordered it to leave the cave and move to his village. Gigo immediately prostrated itself before him, but before they could leave, Gigo warned him about a dangerous beast living in the area. It was called the Gray Wolf, the hunter of the forest. It had a whole pack under its command and supposedly ate enough food to feed all of them. Worse, it was even known to eat its own kind. They hadn't encountered it yet, but if the beast really lived nearby, they couldn't safely return to the village without dealing with it. The food they'd given the goblins wouldn't last forever either, so he decided there was only one solution. He would kill the Grey Wolf. Gigo gathered the fighters, giving them 28 combat-capable goblins. Combined with his own forces, they had 38 fighters and 20 non-combatants. Since protecting those 20 would be the biggest problem during the journey, he divided everyone into 4 squads. Gigo would lead the main unit and protect the non-combatants. Jigu's squad would guard the flanks and escort the main group, with the goblins from his village supporting them by throwing rocks and covering their retreat if the wolves attacked. Gigi and his beast warriors would lead the entire group. Their triple boars and wild dogs had excellent senses, making them perfect for detecting danger ahead. The final squad would be led by him. His job was simple. He would deal with the wolves. Once everything was organized, he ordered Gigo to prepare everyone for the journey. They couldn't afford to lose even one goblin. The trip back to his village would normally take about a day. Goblins didn't have much to carry, so the only reason the journey would take that long was the need to protect the non-combatants. Gigi's beast warriors took the lead, using the triple boars and wild dogs to check the path ahead. Gigo's squad followed behind, while Gigu guarded the sides and kept watch. They also gathered food along the way, and Gigu made sure everything they found was distributed among the main group. Our protagonist, however, stayed at the very back with only 5 goblins around him. If the wolves attacked, those 5 might have to sacrifice themselves to keep the main group safe. Then, halfway through the journey, Gigi contacted him. The beasts had refused to go any farther, so he ordered Gigo to take the rest of his squad and continue ahead. The main group became noisy as they moved, which would normally be enough to attract attention. He immediately ordered Gigu to escort them, because if his prediction was right, something was already coming. Then a powerful howl echoed from behind them. He drew Iron Second and tightened his grip on the great sword. The Grey Wolf had finally appeared, with its entire pack following behind it. The Grey Wolf was massive, nearly 2 meters long and even bigger than him. Its body was covered in scars, while 20 smaller brown wolves followed behind it. They had chosen an open area of the forest as their hunting ground, which was exactly why he needed to hold them back. Gigu and the others had to get the main group safely to the village. He ordered everyone to run while he stayed behind. The wolves immediately surrounded him from different directions, so he activated his magic shield that covered his entire body, and he prepares for the fight. Our protagonist understands that dodging wasn't enough, because even if he dodged all their attacks, it won't be enough to create an opening for a counterattack. The wolves were too fast, and their smaller bodies made it difficult for his huge sword to track them. Still, when several rushed him at once, he swung Iron Second with overwhelming force. The blade cut through 2 wolves and sent another flying. Then he activated his other skill, Overpowering Howl, and released a terrifying roar that froze the wolves in place. The gray wolf, however, remained completely calm. Perhaps it's planning to leave the hunt solely to its subordinate wolves without lifting a finger. But that was a problem because the other wolves could simply ignore him and chase the main group. So he needed to force the leader into the fight. If the gray wolf personally attacked him, the rest of the pack would likely stay behind to protect their leader. Sure enough, the gray wolf eventually stepped forward. He wondered how fast it could be since its subordinates were already ridiculously quick. Then the wolf howled and instantly disappeared from his sight. A powerful attack slammed into his side and sent him flying. Thankfully, his magic shield prevented the blow from killing him, but he immediately realized how bad the situation was. The wolf was simply too fast. Before he could even figure out how to counter it, another attack sent him flying again. At that point, the roles were obvious. He was supposed to be the hunter, but right now, the gray wolf was the one hunting him. Meanwhile, Gigu was fighting the brown wolves and noticed that their chief still hadn't returned. That brought back memories of how overwhelmingly powerful their chief had been from the very beginning. Gigu had only become a chief because its predecessor died, and at that time, their horde didn't even have a goblin rare. But after their new chief, meaning our protagonist, appeared, everything changed. They had more food, captured humans, and even tasted the meat of the double head. Their chief also had a huge ambition to gather every nearby goblin village under his command. That ambition had awakened something inside Gigu. Whether it was loyalty or jealousy, it didn't know. But it knew one thing for certain. If their chief didn't return, that would be a serious problem. The goblins were currently struggling hard against the wave of wolves before them as they fought to make a path of retreat. But then Gigu called out to Gigo and ordered the goblins to keep fighting their way through the wolves. Then he ordered some of its goblin to follow him because he has made its decision. They had to save their king. Back at the battlefield, the gray wolf continued using its pack in a surprisingly calculated way. The wolves didn't bite him. Instead, they repeatedly slammed into him to drain his strength while the gray wolf stayed outside his range. Every time he tried to recover, the gray wolf would suddenly rush in and knock him away again. He slowly forced himself back onto his feet using Iron Second as support. He knew exactly what they were doing, but he couldn't lower his shield. Without it, the wolves would tear him apart. So he had no choice but to maintain the shield and kill the wolves whenever he got the opportunity. Then the area behind him suddenly became noisy. Gigu came rushing in with reinforcements, kicking away the wolves surrounding him. Then he tells him, "Chief, please return." He was grateful, but the gray wolf was still there. The threat hadn't disappeared, so he ordered everyone that they will retreat like this while restraining the wolves. They slowly backed away, making sure the pack couldn't surround them. He realized the wolves had probably chosen this open area because their fighting style worked better there. If they could reach the forest, the trees might give them a better chance. As they approached the forest, the gray wolf ordered its pack to spread out and widen the circle around them. He warned Gigu to stay alert as they entered the trees. If they kept retreating, they should be able to escape the open area soon. But he lowered his guard for just a moment. That was enough. The gray wolf suddenly disappeared and closed the distance instantly. Its roar shook the ground as it charged straight toward him, with brown wolves surrounding them from every direction. He tried to order Gigu to run, but before he could finish, the gray wolf struck him and sent him crashing into the trees. The impact broke several trees, and he bounced through them before finally managing to stand. But the wolves were gone. The gray wolf had disappeared, and even the wolves surrounding Gigu were nowhere to be seen. He immediately feared the worst, thinking they are targeting the main unit. He forced his injured legs to move and told Gigu they were heading for the main unit. Then he released his skill magic shield that was covering his body and rushed toward them at full speed. As they were on the way, a pop-up appears informing him that for driving away the gray wolf, his level rose from 12 to 14. Our protagonist finally caught up with the main unit, but the battle was already over. All of their beasts had been killed, along with 3 goblins, while the rest only suffered minor injuries. He realized there had probably been 2 gray wolves, with one attacking the front while he fought the other at the rear. That's why that gray wolf left him so easily. Without putting itself in any more danger than necessary, it took what it needed and left. The defeat left him furious. He had actually lost to a beast, and that humiliation kept eating away at him. After reaching the settlement, the red snake on his arm began itching uncontrollably, while his fighting instincts started raging on their own. Before he knew it, the skill soul of a crazed warrior had been raging without his permission. Because of the side effects of this skill, his mind now is filled with one thought after another. Find an enemy, kill it, cut it down, and destroy everything in his path. Even while returning with his horde, he nearly lost control. The urge to chase after the gray wolves became overwhelming, but when the old goblin called him king, that word reminded him who he was. He forced himself to activate his skill-insurgent will and suppress the violent urges attacking his mind. Once the evacuation was complete, he ordered everyone to leave him alone until he finally managed to calm down. After settling back into the village, he knows that if he don't do something, he'll end up remembering that loss again, so he decided to go mark the boundaries between the different areas in the settlement. After all, new members have been added to his horde. With that, he reorganized the area so everyone would have a proper place to live. At the center is an open space where the goblins are to have their meals. Then north of that open space is the dwelling place for the prisoners. Then east of that will be his house. The goblin rares will stay close to his house, while the other goblins lived around the central square, with the non-combatants placed farther away. He decided on this arrangement in order to make it easy to distinguish who is close to the king and who is not, as well as to make giving out orders quick and easy. Jigo's horde had added 45 goblins despite their losses, bringing the total population to 92. Still, most of the newcomers were weak, so he left their training to Gigu while he focused on countermeasure for the gray wolves. After all, those beasts are only a day's distance from their village. For the meantime, he ordered his subordinates to spread their hunting grounds towards the west and the east. While thinking about the wolves, he ended up near Rashia's shed and found the kobold happily eating a bone she had given it. The little creature ran over to him without dropping the bone, and the sight somehow made his anger disappear. His red snake's eye revealed that the kobold was level 9, class puppy, and completely enslaved to him. And apparently, all the skills it had was for eating. He then entered the shed and spoke with Rashia, who noticed that he seemed unusually irritated. He admitted that losing some of his subordinates while calling himself king made him feel ashamed. Ever since Rashia was acknowledged by the goddess of healing, Zenobia, and received her divine protection, she's been given a number of special privileges that includes the best education in the world. One of the things she have been taught is the ability to see through lies. This is knowledge she received from humanity's highest institute of education, the Ivory Tower, and now as she looked into our protagonist's eyes, she realized there was no hesitation or deception there. Everything she had been taught about monsters told her they should be selfish, brutal creatures without loyalty, yet this goblin kept proving those beliefs wrong. He had fought the orcs even though they were stronger than goblins, and he had prioritized having his injured comrades healed before himself. If he were human, Rashia believed he could have been remembered as a wise king for generations. She had grown tired of the corruption and selfishness she had seen among humans, from nobles and officials to commoners and even the church. She hated the capital's atmosphere. That's why she had hoped to work at a church somewhere near the borders. For a moment, she held on to the hope that as long as the atmosphere's different, then even the people would act differently. As a follower of Zenobia, she would save those who have been abducted, but instead she was driven into the forest of darkness, and that's how she met our protagonist. And now, despite being human herself, she couldn't deny that these goblins sometimes seemed more human than the people she had known. Yet despite that, she is still human, and if these goblins were to fight against the humans, she wouldn't be able to stand with them. So please, she begged and prayed to her god to not let that happen. Later that night, as our protagonist is sleeping, he dreamed of a sword-wielding maiden fighting a powerful monster. She had no advantage except her courage, yet she refused to retreat. Eventually, she pierced the monster's chest with her sword, even though its flaming blade struck her as well. Before waking, he heard a mysterious voice declare that he was that monster and this was his destiny. He woke up covered in cold sweat and wondered whose voice had spoken to him, wondering if it was destiny or he himself. He tries to go for a walk to calm himself down, but eventually wandered back to Rashia's shed and discovered her praying toward the 2 crimson moons. But then he notices that something about her was completely different. Her expression was empty and her gaze made his entire body freeze. He immediately activated his skill-insurgent will to resist the pressure. But then, in the middle of that, a cursed scream suddenly echoed at the back of his mind. Turns out it was Altesia, the goddess of the underworld. But then, Rashia recited a strange prayer that kept Altesia away, and our protagonist collapsed to his knees. He finally realized that the person standing before him was actually Zenobia, the goddess of healing. As he tries to get up on his feet, she questioned him why he kept rebelling against destiny. But our protagonist challenged her instead by asking her, "Why do you accept destiny?" But Zenobia just tells him that the source of his power, the will to rebel, insurgent will, is not infinite. In fact, it is already reaching its limits. She then touched his forehead through Rashia's body and activated the saint's charm that he had previously ignored. The charm overwhelmed him and forced him to the ground. Zenobia then brings herself closer to his chest and told him to take care of Rashia. Our protagonist yells at her asking, "How much longer do you wish to toy with people's feelings?" But then Rashia's glowing finger headed towards him once again. When her finger pierced into his chest, he felt something change within himself, and he realized that the goddess gave him a gift that would release the curse from her sister, though her voice faded before she could finish. Before leaving, Zenobia warned him that the more he used magic, the closer he would become to her sister. She revealed that her sister was also known as the goddess of rebellion, the goddess who had rebelled against their father and represented revenge and rebellion. Then Zenobia asked him to protect her beloved daughter before Rashia collapsed onto his chest. Once he recovered control of his body, the protagonist thought about everything Zenobia had told him. She had called rebellion against destiny foolish, yet she had also asked him to protect Rashia. He remembered the maiden from his dream and realized that she had been crying. If that woman really was Rashia, then he could not simply accept the destiny he had been shown. He decided that he would not die, and he would never kill Rashia. If protecting her meant rebelling against the gods, then he would do it. If it meant fighting against destiny itself, he would accept that too. He would gladly become a rebel. Then a pop-up window appears, stating that the effect of his skill charm of Saint has increased, and because of Zenobia's divine protection, the mental attacks from Altesia, the goddess of the underworld, would now be suppressed.